This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today I'm going to be talking all about the pros and cons of the internet for travellers. Now, I am old enough to have had travel experience during all kinds of eras related to the internet. For example, back when I was a 9-year-old and we travelled around Europe for 6 months, there was definitely not even the vaguest thought of the internet to people like us. I don't even know if it was, secretly being worked on somewhere, who knows. But in any case, communications were virtually non-existent, and we would call home, or my mum or dad would call home about once a month, if it were possible, basically just to check that none of our relatives had died. And that was the extent of our ability to communicate, and certainly to find information or to look up maps or anything. It all had to be done on a physical piece of paper or a book or atlas or whatever. And then as I got older, things, progressed, obviously. When I was at uni, I remember sending my first email. That was to the guy sitting next to me in the computer lab because I didn't know anyone else with an email. But, things have moved on since then. And for example, when I first moved to Japan, that was 2001. And, the internet was everywhere. People knew what it was. I would go to an internet cafe to check my emails. And later on in my stay in Japan, I would actually be able to read my email on my Japanese mobile phone, although it wasn't a smartphone, that was still to come, but it was pretty cool to be able to read my email there. Anyway, so it got through that era, and obviously today, I would never consider staying at a place that didn't have Wi-Fi. Or if I did, I would have a very good reason for doing it, and I would not do it for more than a couple of nights. So it's really been a massive shift. I'm not actually that old, but things have changed enormously during that time. And I've been talking to a few other travellers about their experiences of travelling with and without the internet. And just to kick it off is a quick chat I had with Leyla from Women on the Road, who actually was the first person to bring this up and what led me to talk to a lot more people about it.
Just to throw in an anecdote about the internet, because this is one of my favorite subjects. I remember when I was traveling overland in Africa and Asia, and this was a period of relative turmoil, I would go to a border and wait for somebody traveling the other way to find out what conditions were like in the country. So you're coming from, so-and-so, how are things? Is there war? I heard on the BBC shortwave that there were troubles along the border. So is it safe to go through? And this is how you would get your news. You would get it from the BBC World Service, which was everybody's Bible at the time. And these new little shortwave radios that you could take with you everywhere. It was fantastic. And from other travelers. And these days you can just sit in your hostel or whatever and punch up on your Wi-Fi iPhone, the latest TripAdvisor or Lonely Planet or whatever reports from that country. You don't even have to move out of your chair. No, I'm not going there. Forget that. How about this place? To me, that's taken a lot of the romance and a lot of the excitement out of travel.
Oh, it really has. There's some advantages to being able to be very informed, but there's a lot of disadvantages to having all the information before you get there. And the surprise is gone, the spontaneity is gone, and just those mishaps and adventures that you have when you don't really know what's happening. And it's a real shame. I completely agree. And yet, if the internet didn't exist, we wouldn't have the work we do, so.
Well, I have to say, right now, my internet is down. Therefore, I don't have the work.
This is true. You're quite right. I know. I don't know where it is in the world that they have good internet, but you obviously don't have great internet. And here in Western Australia, we have terrible internet.
If you want good internet, you have to go to developing countries. They've leapfrogged technologies, yes. And they have terrible phones. They have terrible electricity. They have, great internet, great Wi-Fi.
Yes, I've heard this, and I sometimes seriously consider packing up and going, because it's exactly why we have terrible internet, because it's being pushed through the old technology of the old phone lines. and they're very, very, very slowly rolling out this broadband network across Australia, but it's going to take like a decade or more before we get it. So in the meantime, they're not upgrading the old lines. So we have terrible internet.
Well, I'm in France and I live in a rural village, and it depends which part of the house you're standing in. Some parts of the house are very good and some parts of the house are not. And that goes the same goes for the phone signal. So I can phone from one side of my house, but I can't phone from the other, which is why I'm tethered right now, because if I were to move my phone, I'd probably lose you.
I think I did, in fact, lose Leyla on our conversation not long after that. And it just goes to show that the internet is still a work in progress. And I'm looking forward to one day having much better internet. But, I'm not holding my breath for it. But at the same time, it has opened up all kinds of amazing possibilities. And my next guests are typical examples of people who are really exploiting those possibilities in a really clever way. So let me introduce Jeremy and Katie Kloberdanz of the Life Bohemian. So they are working on the road as they travel, but we had an interesting chat about how the internet is great for enabling you to work on the road, but it can kind of allow that to take over your life, even though you're traveling out there through amazing places.
So we work while we travel. We both have remote jobs, which rely completely on the internet. So we're really at the mercy of Wi-Fi. And we also, we do a podcast too, and we write the blog and all that, which is, as you know, also, of course, at the mercy of the internet.
It sure
so
is.
everything we do is just, we need the internet. And we're, I recently have told Jeremy, like, I feel like I just stare at a screen all day long. It's either something simple like taking photos or even, I just had to delete my Snapchat app because I was just going nuts on it. But so recently we were checking into an Airbnb, and they said they had advertised that they had Wi-Fi. And so, everything was good. And when we asked for the password, they kind of looked at us and were like, oh, we don't have Wi-Fi. The house isn't even set up for that sort of thing. So it's impossible. And I was like, I'm sorry, impossible, you said? It's impossible. And so Jeremy and I just kind of looked at each other. We were
panic.
We were total panic. Thankfully, it was a Saturday, so we didn't have a ton to do. But we were in Italy, so there was a slight language barrier anyway. And when she said impossible, I was just like, oh, that is not good.
And so I asked her, I said, well, you had advertised that. That was one of the main reasons why we booked. We needed something that was pet friendly, and we needed something with internet. And that's exactly why we chose this place. It was in our budget, and it had those two criteria. And she said, oh, well, the karaoke bar about 2 kilometers away, they have Wi-Fi. You can just go there and work.
Oh, no.
And that was why she had listed on her Airbnb that Wi-Fi was available, because in her eyes, her mind, it was 2 kilometers down the road.
Oh, that's terrible.
We went a little bit back and forth trying to figure out a solution and, do all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, what do I do if I try to go buy a SIM card and they're not open, or, the karaoke bar is closed on Thursdays, what do I do? And she said, well, you just take a holiday. And I said, and so I turned to Jeremy and I was like, I'm not sure if they're understanding me. Like, maybe there's a misunderstanding of how like a job works. and then I thought to myself, I was like, wait a minute, maybe I'm the one that's misunderstanding how a job works. Maybe she's right. And she's fitting her life. She's living her life first. And it's a kind of a catch-22 because I have to work to fund the life, the life that I'm living. But I just kind of, for a second, I just sat back and I was like, it's not helpful in this situation because we still have to find a solution. But that mindset that she has of living her life and making a job fit around her life. Whereas, for me, I often have to fit my life around my job, and she has it the other way around. And that was really kind of a powerful perception shift for me. And so, we've made a couple of changes since then, just because I couldn't believe how powerful just that shift in thinking a complete 180 from how I was doing things before. And she just said it so casually, like, well, of course, you just take a holiday if you can't find the internet. And so it was really powerful for me to kind of change my perception on that.
Well, and it tied back into some stereotypes of, and actually some good ones, where, Europeans more so than Americans just have such a greater work-life balance.
Sure.
They have a better grasp on that, and they're not just at the mercy of their jobs. They don't live to work. And so that's a good stereotype, something that you don't have to harp on too much. And it, like Katie said, helped us realize, well, maybe we can make some changes.
Yeah, it's a real double-edged sword, the internet and the ability it gives us to be able to work from anywhere, because that's fantastic. But yeah, then you still have to work while you travel, and it can be hard to remember to switch off sometimes. I think that's it's nice to sometimes have that must. I mean, I remember when I was first traveling a lot. When I moved to Japan, was the first thing I did where I was overseas for an extended period of time, and we had an internet cafe near the school I was teaching at. And it was open at a few odd hours. And so, maybe once a week I would hop on the internet and email my family. And that was all anyone expected. And now I kind of, if I go overseas, especially because I've got my son with me, so, my mum back home will want to know what he's up to. I don't think she minds so much about what I do, but, she'll...
Right.
But I think she wants to see what he's up to. So, she'll she wouldn't mind if I didn't, but I have an expectation that I should regularly send photos back home. We might only be away for a few weeks, but, I have to email photos of what we're up to and what my son's up to. And, because the internet is always there, whereas 10 years ago even, we wouldn't have done that. But now, because it exists, there's all these sort of extra tasks that seem important. And it's a good reminder, as you say, that actually you don't always have to do all those things.
Yeah. And my mom is the same way, except she only cares about seeing photos of Lily, our dog. Not a care in the world, about what Jeremy and I are up to, how work's going, how anything's going. She's like, well, what's Lily doing? And I'm like, Lily sleeps 15 hours a day. She's doing the same thing she's been doing all day, every day.
I really enjoyed hearing about Jeremy and Katie's experience and their reflection on perhaps their American work ethic and not having enough work-life balance was something that could be addressed by sometimes not having any internet available. And I think I have to confess, I guess, that I've had the same experience. Obviously, I don't work and travel full-time, but when I do travel, I inevitably am working a little bit at the same time, although I generally try to minimise it if possible. But the nature of my work means that it's not really possible. And for example, when I was travelling through Iceland last year, I sometimes regretted that I did need to do some work, and some of it I managed to postpone. Suddenly the work became not quite as important as experiencing Iceland, and the internet connection wasn't quite as great, especially in rural Iceland, as I'd been hoping for. So I sort of learned that lesson, but I need to continue to learn it, I think. Yeah, the internet, it has its advantages, but it really can be a tricky beast to tame. Now, my next guest has yet another perspective on the internet. He's about a decade younger than me, which I think means he has a really useful bit of feedback about the internet and being social when you're travelling. Now, this is the first time that Tom Parson has been on the Thoughtful Travel podcast, but you'll hear him again in a few episodes' time for sure, because we had a really long and interesting chat. And he's the first guest that has been chosen by my son, and you'll know why soon, because Tom is the Lego backpacker. So I'll have links in the show notes, of course, but he's particularly popular on Instagram and has these really cool photos of little Lego guys in famous places around the world where he has taken them, and just really cool to have a look at. But in any case, this is the chat that Tom and I had about the internet and travel.
Well, it's amazing because it's come up quite a bit during when I've met people at hostels and stuff. I've met people when I went to Vietnam. So this is back before smartphones.
Yes.
So you didn't have Google Maps. So you had the trusty Lonely Planet. and you'd be going off the not terrible, but the very
Limited maps.
simplified limited maps, and then you'd have like a print off of the local area, or you'd have written down a list of directions of how to get to the hostel that you're staying at, or like you'd write down third left, second right, and you'll be at this temple or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it was such a different experience. It was 11 years ago when I was in Vietnam. So, because I'm 31 now, and when I was there, I was 20. So, when I was there, it was a real different experience too. Don't get me wrong, the internet is absolutely great, and it helps when you're doing research or you're trying to see where to go or how to get there, and it's a great resource. But at the same time, the other thing that I've noticed with the internet and the availability of it is when you're staying at a hostel now. It used to be that you'd go, you still have it, but it's not as strong as before. You'd go and stay at a hostel, and it'll be a room full of strangers, and everyone will be sitting down playing cards, and you'd ask if you could join them so you could meet them, or you could communicate with them, or you could sit down, someone would be reading a book or something like that. It was quite laid back. But now, if you get to a common room, you would turn up and everyone's got their tablet, phone, or computer out on the internet, doing something. I don't know if they're blogging, or I don't know if they're just looking at Instagram or anything like that. I mean, there are such great advantages with the internet, but at the same time, the social side of it when traveling now is vastly different to what it was 10 years ago. It was a lot easier to meet new people, and you'd get their address or you'd get their email to send them an email. And communicate that way, and you'd use a terribly slow computer in the hostel to try and check where to go next or what's going on in the world. But now it's quite different with the internet. I mean, but as I said, I mean, with the internet too, because obviously I'm an Instagram user, and I use Instagram a lot. I do try to put my phone away and go through the effort of meeting people. But I've found it is quite different these days when you're sitting down, especially with the social media side of it too, when you're meeting people at hostels and things like that, to try and meet them and talk to them, because everyone's kind of glued on some sort of screen doing that kind of thing. So there are positives and there are negatives to it. So it's quite different. It's come up quite a bit at different hostels that I've stayed at. At big hostels, I find it's harder to meet people because of that situation. But at the smaller hostel, you're kind of forced into sitting at a table with 10 people, and you have to meet them, you have to talk to them.
Yeah, it's a real shame, isn't it? And you're like sort of just old enough to recognise the difference, because you had this experience in Vietnam where it was quite different to now. But you think of like people 10 years younger than you, sort of, in their early 20s now, who've never known any different. And I think that's kind of a shame, because, I mean, I sound like a, real old fogey now, because when I started travelling, there was, barely any internet, and I would look at my email once a week, if that, at an internet cafe. But, and you got lost way more often, and you couldn't find out where to stay, and you just turn up somewhere and wander around until you found somewhere, or you'd use your Lonely Planet, or, all of those kind of things. And yeah, sure, it's heaps easier now, but the old way, you had a lot more sort of those serendipitous, random, unexpected moments, and it's a real shame to miss out on them.
Yeah.
And as you say, to miss out on that social interaction, because when you go to a new place, you land up in a new hostel, and you don't know anyone. It is hard, you don't always feel in the mood to get to know people, and so I can imagine it's super easy to just pull out your phone or whatever device and bury yourself in that and not actually talk to anyone, and it's kind of a socially acceptable excuse to ignore people. And it's a shame that that's the way it is now.
Yeah, it's quite different. I mean, but don't get me wrong, there's that side of it, but also the internet's given all the advantages when you use different websites like, it sounds like I'm doing product placement, but like if you use like Skyscanner or something like that to find cheap flights to help with your travel.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So, I mean, the research, the backbone of starting your trip or planning your trip or organizing where to go next is all based around the internet. I mean, but it's very different to what it was before. And yeah, I think it's interesting I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know how far it's going to develop, but
There might be this revolution in 10 years where everyone says, hey, we should actually just talk to each other. And they, you know, there'll be like hostels that are really revolutionaries for saying, you know, no device usage in common areas or something. And people will start to interact again. Who knows?
Yeah, there was one place I stayed in, where was it? It was in Spain. They actually had a like big living room and it had a TV in there too, but it actually had a massive sign. It just said no phones.
Oh, wow, great.
So it was absolutely great. It was great because it was a small hostel. It only had 25 beds, but it was great because you could sit down. You knew if you're in that room, some people were reading a book, or some people will be like, if you see someone sitting there with a Lonely Planet book, which is quite rare these days, if you see them looking at the Lonely Planet book, you'd be like, oh, if you're looking at that, you should check out this, and it gives you an introduction. But yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, I'm not too sure what's going to happen next. I mean, with the internet, and there's particularly new products that have come out now so that you can video with a 360 view and everything, so you can see what it's like, which, don't get me wrong, it looks absolutely amazing on the computer, but you don't want to see the world sitting at a computer. You want to...
No, that's right. You want to see it in real life, yeah. Yeah, it's a shame when you've seen everything before you get there, I think. I like to know a bit, like I do quite a lot of research, but not too much, because I don't want to feel like I know somewhere inside out before I arrive. Because you almost feel like, okay, well, yeah, I know what that looks like, and now here it looks just how I expected.
I'm not a photographer, but I do like taking lots of photos and things like that. So I always look up in cities that I go to, or different areas I go to see what the best photo places are, like the most photographic areas and things like that. And you jump on platforms like Instagram, and you jump on there and you see this photo of this amazing cathedral, and you're like, oh, that's really cool. And then you go there and then you realize that photo has been edited so much that you would not believe. So,
Yes. Well, that's very disappointing.
So it gets
then.
your hopes up too.
Yeah, that's true. That's not fair. I thought Tom's perspective was really interesting, and it's especially sad to hear that in your average hostel these days, people are getting to know each other less and less because it's just easier to bury your head in your phone or device. But maybe it'll change in the future. We'll have to wait and see, I suppose. So what do you think about the internet and travel? Love it or loathe it? I guess to summarise my feelings is I love the ability to stay in touch to a degree. I love the ability to research to a degree, but I don't love the fact that it seems to capture me too much, and it's hard to tear myself away from it. I deliberately never buy a local SIM card for my phone or device when I'm traveling in a foreign country, because I just think that's too much. And at least if I'm out and about and I don't have any access to my to the internet, then that's gonna keep me away from it for a bit longer. I don't know. I guess it's something we struggle with not only when we're traveling, but even in everyday life at the moment. And eventually we all have to work out our kind of limits for ourselves. But there's still some really good things about it. And you certainly wouldn't be listening to this podcast if the internet didn't exist. So that's one great thing, right? So anyway, thank you so much for listening to episode 21 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. And I'll give you some details about my lovely guests so you can go and look up some more information about them. So first of all, I had Leyla Alyanak, who's from the great website Women on the Road at womenontheroad.com. And if you want to travel solo as a woman especially, then Leyla is your woman. After that, I spoke with Jeremy and Katie Kloberdanz of The Life Bohemian. It's a website and a podcast, so you can find their blog at thelifebohemian.com, or you can search iTunes for their The Life Bohemian podcast, which is also a really great listen. It was actually sitting next to the Thoughtful Travel podcast in New and Noteworthy at one stage, which is how I came across it and started listening, and I loved it. Also, they love Iceland, so of course I love them. And lastly, I spoke with Tom Parson of the Lego Backpacker. Now, there's a link you definitely want to follow from the show notes. So his Instagram account is at the Lego Backpacker. And just gorgeous, gorgeous shots. My very favourite is of a little Lego guy in front of St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. Very, very cute. And as I said, we'll talk to Tom some more in the future. And he has got a website coming soon, so depending on when you listen to this, it may be live or may not. So take a sneak peek at thelegobackpacker.com and see if he's up and running. Of course, these details and more will be all in the show notes, and for this episode, you'll find them at notaballerina.com/21. And as always, I'm so grateful for the lovely reviews and ratings that I've been receiving from our listeners. And if you want to do the same, you will really make my day. So just head into iTunes and leave a review for the Thoughtful Travel podcast. You can also tweet me at Amanda Kendall, use the Thoughtful Travel Pod hashtag, or find Not a Ballerina on Facebook to get in touch and tell me what you think about travel and the internet. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.
Jackrabbit FM for your ears.
Who is that? Hi, Podcast.